At this time, please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of I Square Foot, Dave Conway.
Welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Officially welcome to the Economic Issues Outlook, Legislative and Regulatory Overview Luncheon. I Square Foot is honored to be here as the sponsor of this important event. Today's esteemed speaker and esteemed panel will attempt to make order of the chaos in Washington, D.C. Good luck, fellas. At I Square Foot, for many years, we've been bringing order to chaos every day. And I'd like for you to watch this brief video to see just how.
Risk. This simple word means so much more in the world of construction, an industry in which success has long been associated with walking the fine line of how much risk to take and when. One area where contractors have faced increased risk in recent years is subcontractor default. However, with the right information and the right tools to get it, this is one type of risk that contractors can mitigate. Fortunately, this is what I Square Foot does best. Since the early days of the internet, I Square Foot has been on the forefront of creating innovative solutions for the commercial construction industry that make it possible to gather and share information more easily. Today, our network supports more than 170,000 projects annually and connects over 400,000 registered users who use I Square Foot to communicate, manage the bid process, and find work. Simply put, I Square Foot gives its users the tools they need to work more efficiently and bring consistency to the industry. Through partnerships with industry thought leaders like the AGC of America and now Consensus Docs, we've worked to find, refine, and offer access to solutions that make a real difference in the way people work. The Consensus Docs pre-qualification form, the 721 Subcontractor Statement of Qualifications, was developed with a coalition of 38 industry organizations and offers an industry-standard way to manage and minimize risk. All it needed to forever change the way the commercial construction industry deals with subcontractor pre-qualification was access to a tool that helps them standardize the process, bringing consistency for construction professionals everywhere. Done. With I Square Foot's pre-qualification management application, every general contractor can now take advantage of this powerful online tool to quickly and efficiently gather the critical information they need to select the right subcontractors for every project. And its simple, standardized design makes it far easier for subs to complete and update, even for multiple submissions. The time is now for your company to take advantage of this opportunity to more effectively evaluate and manage the information that is key to successful subcontractor pre-qualification. For details on this application and to learn how you can participate at no cost, visit isquarefoot.com/AGC-prequalification. Or contact your AGC chapter executive. You owe it to your clients, your business, and your vendors to learn more about this powerful advantage today.
So 12 years ago, this month, we were honored to be selected as a strategic partner of AGC of America. In those 12 years, we have focused on the pre-construction process, and we in fact have brought order to chaos. Let me share with you some statistics. In the last 12 months, 170,000 projects through the platform. Since the video was created just less than 60 days ago, we've added 40,000 additional registered users. Today we have 440,000 registered users. We simply would not have been able to do that had we not had the tremendous support of the AGC of America, many of its local chapters, and importantly, many of the AGC members both here in this room and around the country. Today, through our research and through information that we've received in our discussions with the Bond Producers Association as well as the Surety and Fidelity Association, we recognize that subcontractor default is a significant issue in our industry. As a result, we believe that through our partnership with AGC and others, that we are well positioned to provide you and your company the resources and the tools necessary to manage the information to enable you to mitigate and reduce risk by selecting the right subcontractors at the right time who have the right qualifications to meet your requirements and the requirements of your owner customers. We have placed on each of the chairs here a ticket, and this ticket provides you with the information that you will need to learn more about how we have brought together a tremendous consortium of industry leaders and thought leaders to develop an industry standard for subcontractor qualification. And with that, I would like to turn it over to, who's up next?
I'm up next.
Are you up next? He's been referred to as the voice of God, so it's easy to turn it over to the voice of God. Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your lunch. We'll begin our program shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, please welcome AGC's Chief Executive Officer, Stephen Sandher.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Good afternoon. Thank you, Dave Conway and I Square Foot, for your continued support of AGC, for your terrific partnership. You've been great to work with over the years, and we wish you continued success. So this is a lunch where we are combining economic, regulatory, and legislative issues. Ken Simonson is going to tell you what you want to know. Mike Kennedy is going to cover the regulatory area and tell you what you need to know. And Jeff Schoaf is going to cover Congress and what you'd like to forget. So first on the agenda is Ken Simonson, whom you all know as our chief economist, but this year Ken has been pulling double duty. He is currently serving as the national president of the National Association of Business Economists, which allows him to expand our brand. Ken is not only now even more sought out from the press in his capacity as president of the NABE. He's been on just about all the major business TV networks, NPR, radio outlets across the country in his capacity as president of the National Association of Business Economists. But he also, in that capacity, has been in a number of representing that association and through them us. Been called into meetings with the Federal Reserve and with Chairman Bernanke, with the President's Economic Council, as well as with the Congressional Budget Office Director, Doug Elmendorf. So Ken needs no introduction to this crowd, but here is our chief economist, Ken Simonson.
Thank you very much. It's a special treat to be here today on a day when we have a lot of good news to celebrate about construction. Specifically, the employment report that came out this morning showed that construction employment had rose by 48,000 in February. That was the biggest one-month gain in 6 years and brought employment in the industry to the highest level in 3.5 years. Now, I don't want to put too much stock in 1 month's numbers, especially a winter month when the seasonal adjustments can be pretty tricky. But it was the 9th straight month of employment gains. And on a year-over-year basis, construction employment grew 2.5%. That was faster than the overall economy. So I do think the recovery is for real. But I have to warn you that it is going to be uneven. And frankly, you as contractors have not been that optimistic. Back in December, we did our 4th annual survey, and I thank the 1,300 companies, general contractors who responded to that. It really gives us a depth of coverage that I don't think any of the other industry surveys have about the views of the construction industry. And as this slide shows, there were only 2 of the 10 industry segments that we asked you about that you said were going to do better in 2013. Specifically, the question was, do you expect the dollar volume of projects that you'll be considering bidding on to be greater or less than the year before? And in the hospital and higher ed side, 36% said there'd be an increase, but 26% said a decrease. We asked the same thing about these 9 other segments. Power construction was the only other one that was positive. Well, that was 3 months ago, so I hope that more of you are finding work. But we did also ask, when do you expect the overall construction market to improve? Only 20% said 2013, 34% said 2014, and nearly half of you said it would be after that. Then we drilled down to how about your own company? Did you hire or lay off on net in 2012? And of course, this was only answered by surviving companies, and maybe only ones that felt good enough to answer a survey. And for 2012, it was very closely divided. A little over a third said they'd hired, a little less than a third said they had shrunk. But for 2013, 31% said that they were going to be hiring. That's actually a little fewer than said they had hired in 2012, but only 9% said that they were going to be laying off. So clearly a mixed bag, and that's the way the year is shaping up so far. I see 3 trends that are helping the industry this year and will continue to do so for the next several years. The so-called shale gale, the hydraulic fracturing that's taking place in several parts of the country, is helping construction not just around the wells, but in many areas. The Panama Canal expansion is affecting ports on all of our coasts, but also inland. And both of these are affecting several different categories of construction. And then multifamily construction has been booming almost everywhere, and single family has been gaining ground quite rapidly in the last few months. But as I say, it's not universal. We see 3 things also holding back construction. Government spending, and I know many of you cheer when there's a reduction in the size of government in general, but unquestionably it is reducing some of the money that's going into construction. Consumers, they are spending more, but they're putting much more of that into internet purchases and not into retail stores. So retail construction is also going to be a weaker market, has really lagged the recovery in private non-residential overall. And then while the economy as a whole has added jobs for 35 straight months now, more than 4.5 million of them just in the last, or almost 4.5 million just in the last 2 years, nevertheless, our total employment is still below the peak before the recession, and even firms that are growing are often doing so in place. They're squeezing more workers into existing space, and aside from a few cities, they're not putting up new offices. So a very uneven recovery in terms of types of activity and where it's taking place. This is a simplified map of where that shale gale is happening now or may happen. Lots of big blue bubbles there showing where the geology is right. And what is the impact on construction? Each of those wells counts as mining, but not construction, but each one requires some sort of access road, a pad for the well itself, housing for the pumping equipment and the processing and storage equipment, a pond, and then a pipeline or something to store what comes up before it's taken off site. Nearby, you get processing and delivery of water, and the local community benefits from the spending by the drilling companies, by their workers, the landowners who have become royalty holders. But the biggest benefits to construction and the most diffused occur upstream and downstream. By upstream, I mean all those orders for pipe, for machinery, for the special fracking sand that gets injected into the wells along with water. And then downstream, we're seeing tremendous benefits. Even before approval of the Keystone XL pipeline, there have been many new interstate lines built and shorter lines to carry the now abundant natural gas, for instance, from Pennsylvania to New York and New England, natural gas liquids between existing pipelines and processing plants. We're getting new factories, ag chemicals, petrochemicals, steel, that are using the natural gas or the liquids as a feedstock or a fuel. Power plants rapidly putting in new natural gas-fired facilities. And soon multi-billion-dollar liquefaction trains and export terminals, and also truck stops spread out all across the country to fuel a new generation of liquefied natural gas, LNG-powered tractors, and compressed natural gas, local pickup and delivery vehicles, transit buses, and shuttle buses. So I think that this boom is here to stay. It will affect many kinds of construction and all over the country. The Panama Canal expansion also means business for contractors in many places and many categories. This map shows ports on the East Coast and one on the Gulf Coast that are preparing by dredging harbors deeper, lengthening piers and wharves, and building much bigger marshaling and storage yards for containers and chassis, and then trying to improve their landside connections so that when these giant so-called post-Panamax container ships that can hold 15,000 containers, 4 times as many as the current number, show up, there will be some place to stack the containers and move them rapidly inland. The railroads are spending billions of dollars this year to improve their connections from the Port of Houston or the Port of Long Beach in Los Angeles all the way as far inland as Chicago. And warehouse and manufacturing construction are likely to follow. Here on the West Coast, those ports aren't sitting idle. They're improving the on-port rail access at the Port of Los Angeles, rebuilding the Gerald Desmond Bridge out of the Port of Long Beach to provide much better truck and rail connection. Third trend that I mentioned is the growth in residential construction. This graph shows as a blue line, yeah, it's blue on your monitor too, the year-over-year change in multifamily construction starting at the beginning of 2011. You can see the industry was still dropping steeply. But those declines lessened rapidly through the first half of 2011 and turned positive in the second half and have kept going stronger ever since. The last figure we have, January spending, was up an unbelievable 55% over January 2012. Well, there's better news ahead, believe it or not. Multifamily permits have proven to be a very reliable indicator of starts and of construction spending. And those have consistently been rising by more than 30% on a year-over-year basis. And yesterday, the National Association of Home Builders put out its quarterly survey of their multifamily home builders. They see good times continuing for the next several months. On the single-family side, there's also been good and accelerating growth, as you can see from the black line. It turned positive just a few months later than the multifamily, and it has stayed below, but with about the same slope. But I think that single-family line may stall out later this year, that we have more young adults who are saying, I'm not ready to lock in to buying a home particularly if the only place I can afford to buy is way out in the suburbs where I'm going to have to use my car to get wherever I want and maybe pay $4 a gallon, or here in Southern California I was paying $4.15 yesterday for gas. Instead, I'll rent a while longer, and that usually means multifamily. Yes, the single family is going to keep growing above last year's levels. The permits and starts figures are very good on that also, but may not get back to where we were last decade. Well, let me move on to give you a little more of a picture about the non-residential construction. This is a rather complicated chart to see and perhaps hard to view from the back of the room. The top left shows the monthly level of what's called value put in place, or construction spending at a seasonally adjusted annual rate going back to the beginning of 2008. That's not even the high point. In fact, far from it. The high point was in March of 2006 at over $1.2 trillion. By the beginning of 2011, total spending had dropped all the way to $740 billion. And since then, you can see it's grown pretty steadily. It did take a drop in January, but that was a result of some of those policy anomalies. Specifically, there was a production tax credit for wind, and I know many of you were putting up wind facilities, and you're well aware that it looked like the law said the tax credit would expire December 31st, along with so many of the things that were contributing to the fiscal cliff, and that wind facilities had to be put in service, have the turbines generating electricity by that date. So there was a mad scramble to finish that construction in December, and no orders for new wind facilities in January because it looked like the tax credit was going to go away. Well, as it turned out, on January 2nd, that tax credit and most of the code was restored. So now we're starting to see orders again for wind facilities that will add to construction totals later in the year. But that explains why there is a sudden downturn in January. Nevertheless, on a year-over-year basis, if you look at the lower left, you can see total spending has been rising even through January. If you look at the upper right, we have three segments there. The green line is private non-residential construction. That held up through 2008. Then when the recession hit, plunged and started coming back early last year. The red line, private residential, also fell sharply from 2006, in fact, into 2011, and is now growing. And the blue line, public construction, held pretty steady, even though state and local started dropping off in 2009. That's when we got the last burst of base realignment projects and also the stimulus money at the federal level. Well, if you look in the lower right, you can see the green line, that private non-residential, it's still positive on a year-over-year basis, but it has tapered off somewhat, and meanwhile the red line has surpassed it. So you may not be able to see the numbers. The latest 12-month gain is 4% for private non-res, 22% for private residential, and then the blue line is staying right below that broken zero line. It's been down continuously on a year-over-year basis for the last more than 2 years now. Public construction down 3% in the last 12 months. What do I think is going to happen over the next 12 months? Well, let's take it segment by segment. This shows private non-residential, private and public non-residential combined. And if you look at the top right, you can see it's up just 1% over the last 12 months. And then these are ordered in terms of decreasing current size. The biggest is power construction. That was down that 1%, and again, it's because of that drop-off in wind. Power, in this case, these are the Census Bureau definitions, includes all the oil and gas. This should be a big winner this year. I'm going to put it back in bold in a few months, showing that it's growing on a year-over-year basis. Educational, down 6%. A mixed story there. Private college construction has been booming, and I think will continue to do so. Public college, mostly hit by the same budget squeeze as other state and local budget items, except for those revenue-generating facilities at big state universities, stadiums, arenas, student unions, parking structures, some dormitories. Small niche, but it's the only positive thing on the public educational construction side. So I'd put that category as a negative again this year. Highway and street up for now. I think it's going to stay level. Little help from public-private partnerships, toll facilities, but basically with the federal funding level through September 2014, that's going to hold about where it is. Manufacturing, big comeback, going to continue, partly driven by the shale gale, partly by reshoring, but this looks strong through next year at least. Commercial, a term everybody uses differently. Census refers to retail, warehouse, and farm construction, just barely holding on. I think the warehouse side is clearly benefiting from that switch of consumers from spending in stores to ordering online. Wanting it now means that the online retailers are building a lot more distribution facilities close to their customers. So that smaller piece will do well, but the retail is going to be limited to mixed-use projects, the first floor of a building that has apartments above it or maybe a hotel, not the standalone big box stores or strip shopping centers that propelled the industry last decade. Healthcare, to me, a surprise that it still hasn't come back. Just this week in San Francisco, they appear to have reached agreement on $2 billion worth of hospital construction at 2 sites. So there have been some spectacularly large projects announced, but overall, I think the movement is away from big hospital construction. They expect to see fewer beds occupied or fewer I won't say passenger seats, but the equivalent for the hospital sector, a big push to have people treated in things like the minute clinics that the drugstore chains are building or specialized urgent care facilities, and to get them out of hospital rooms where they just get sicker or pick up new infections. So hospital construction may be subdued, but overall health care I think will grow this year. Transportation, a mix of investments by railroads, like I mentioned, truck lines, and then on the public side, ports, airports, transit systems, getting some streetcars and so forth. But I think this will not be strong on the public side, but will be on the private. Office construction up for now. That's because so many leases that were signed in 2007 expired last year, and so you're getting a lot of churn among tenants as they crowd more workers into existing space or they move to the half-empty office building across the street. But as I said, for the most part, not a lot of new office construction, with exceptions like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Seattle, and then a single or few building projects in other big cities. And then some of the other publicly funded categories, sewage and waste disposal and the very small water, public safety, conservation categories, they're being dragged down by the continuing holdback in public spending or downturn in public spending. So certainly a mixed picture. Very quickly, this shows how spotty things are around the country. The states in green have had construction employment growth from December 2011 to December 2012. 24 of those. States in various shades of pink or red declined, 24 of those. So very balanced now. By the end of the year, I think I'll be able to show a much greener map, though. Some states consistently green, others still staying in the pink or red, but a lot of them switching back and forth. Let me finish up by talking a little bit about the employment and the materials situation. These figures came out this morning. On the left, construction unemployment rate. It's not seasonally adjusted, so February is always particularly high, but it came down sharply from almost 22% 2 years ago to 15.7% today. That's really good in terms of meaning there aren't as many former construction workers sitting at home saying, I'm unemployed, I'm looking for work. But look at the right side. The drop in that number is 570,000, but only half that many, 300,000, have been hired in construction. The rest are either among the 4.4 million hired elsewhere, or they've retired or gone back to school, but they're just not available for you. And when your demand does pick up, and I think for more of you it will be 2013, you may be hard-pressed to find the experienced worker you want. And so I think things may get more difficult later in the year. This shows at the top construction spending. These lines all start at the low point for spending, the beginning of 2011, and you can see the cumulative increase is now 17%. The red line snaking along the bottom shows employment has gone up only 6%. So who's doing all of that additional building? Well, partly you're working the people you already had harder. The total hours in construction, shown by the black line in the middle, has now gone up 11%. As you move part-timers to full-time, full-timers you're paying overtime, but there's still a gap there, and I think that really reflects the productivity increases you've gotten. Well, I think construction spending will continue rising at about the rate you see, 8 to 10% over the course of this year. And that means, yes, you'll pay more overtime, but I think you're going to hire a lot more workers, probably about 250,000 more this year, whereas last year it was only 100,000. How about materials costs? You can see the big run-up. In this case, I picked as the low point March of '09 after prices plunged briefly in the Great Recession. You can see how much prices ran up for materials and diesel fuel in 2010 and the first half of 2011. Since then, it's been a bumpy course, but not an upward one, but it has stayed 16% higher than it was in '09. Labor costs, reflected by the Employment Cost Index, have risen about 5%. But bid prices for offices right where they were, and for highways still below. So that's why you are hearing about more subcontractor defaults, as you heard in the presentation right at the beginning of lunch. Well, to summarize, I see private non-residential spending rising 10 to 15% this year, almost as much as the 18% we had last year. Residential also up 10 to 15% compared to 17% last year. Public construction down 2 to 5%, similar to the 3% decline last year. So total spending up 5 to 10%, like the 10% that we had last year. Materials costs starting to rise a little bit more, but still much milder than we had in most of the period from 2004 to early 2011. And labor costs still pretty tame. Beyond this year, good news continuing. This is a forecast of average increase year over year, still in that upper single-digit range. We could have a pause, we could have a breakout for a while, but pretty much positive news for the next 4 years. Materials costs rising a little faster than they have been, and generally faster than the consumer price index. Labor costs starting to pick up more as you have to pay more overtime or bid more to get workers back, but your bid prices also rising a little bit faster. So that's the story. I'm sticking to it till I get new data. When I do, it'll go in the Data Digest, my weekly one-page summary of economic news. As AGC members, everyone in your company is welcome to subscribe for free. Just go to agc.org/Data Digest. And if you have a question or you have one of those lovely "Dear customer, we're raising your prices" letters, send them to me at simonsandk@agc.org. Thanks very much.
Now it's time for our roundtable discussion today. Joining Ken Simonson and AGC's Chief Executive Officer Steve Sandher are AGC's General Counsel Mike Kennedy and Senior Executive Director of Government Affairs Jeff Schoaf.
So, thanks, Mike and Jeff, for joining us. Each of them have PowerPoints. We're going to let Mike go first, but before he starts, I'm going to say some nice things about him, which I will retract if he goes too long. Mike, as our general counsel, oversees a lot of our regulatory activities, and Mike likes to remind us all the time that AGC, unlike a lot of other associations, changes facts on the ground. One of the reasons that we are able to change facts on the ground, a lot of the reasons that we are, is because of Mike. Mike has got a fertile brain, and he is a good strategist, and he has the intellectual capacity to in a very agile fashion, move from subject to subject without missing a beat. So with that being said, Mike, live up to that.
Thank you, sir. I usually start by telling people my name is Kennedy. I'm a lawyer. I'm from D.C. And, of course, I'm here to help you. What you're going to get is a quick snapshot of what the regulatory world looks like. I was talking to some folks at lunch about this, and our regulatory initiatives are much like your safety programs. It never ends. The fact that you did a good job yesterday means that you did a good job yesterday. We go to work every day knowing that there's going to be a new challenge, something coming up, and the process never ends. What we've got here is a quick snapshot of some of the things we've been looking at. At this point in time, we're going to talk about labor management relations, in particular project labor agreements. We have a whole slew of environmental requirements going from stormwater to lead paint, coal combustion waste, and hydraulic fracking. We've got some socioeconomic problems that have our members very concerned. Those of you performing federal aid highway and transportation work are familiar with the DBE program. We're now at a point where a problem that's already out there is about to get worse. We're very concerned about that. Those of you working for the federal government know that you have affirmative action requirements. And we've seen some new things come along with regard to veterans and individuals with disabilities. And finally, I'll say a few words about some of the safety issues that are out there, new standards requiring written safety programs, and a new standard on silica. With regard to project labor agreements, we have an executive order that this president issued encouraging them. This executive order requires a case-by-case determination that a project labor agreement will improve economy and efficiency in federal procurement. We've done our best to make the federal government live up to that standard. At this point, we've sent out 63 letters to federal agencies, urging them to come forward with any evidence that they may have that a project labor agreement will have its intended effect. We encourage agencies to defer to contractors, and I want to pause to explain that AGC is not opposed to project labor agreements per se. What we're opposed to is having the government interfere with any contractor's labor relations policy, one way or the other. We ask the agencies to come forward with the facts that their own president's executive order requires them to have to justify a PLA. Thus far, over AGC's objections, we've only seen one mandate. We're 63 and 1. Now, I have to add, there's a GSA policy that we continue to be concerned about. It doesn't set aside projects for PLAs, but it does tilt the field. And we've let our views be known to GSA, and we're waiting for their response. Moving along, stormwater. We could go on forever about this. This is a federal program designed to protect the earth from dirt. This program, this goes back to 2001. We've actually been dealing with this for well over 10 years. At one point, we persuaded EPA not to adopt a rigid numeric limit for the turbidity of stormwater runoff. The environmental groups went to court. In 2008, the Ninth Circuit said, sorry, folks, the EPA has a non-discretionary duty to promulgate this standard. And of course, with any standard that requires a numeric limit, you've got monitoring requirements, you've got reporting requirements. In fact, the reporting requirement they were contemplating would have you put the results of your testing on a public website available to the entire world within 24 hours. So your problems and your exceedances were not something you were going to keep between yourself and the agency. In 2009, EPA met the deadline, actually promulgated something we call an effluent limitation guideline. And if you can spell that, God bless you. By 2010 and 2011, though, EPA had to pull it back. The bottom line, and I'm making these numbers up, they set a nationwide standard on the turbidity of stormwater based on sampling done at maybe 8 job sites in 3 states. When confronted with that, actually working in tandem with the home builders, they brought the lawsuit. EPA had to pull back. Now, the breaking news is that just a month ago, EPA has announced that it's going to formally withdraw this numeric limit. That proposal is expected in February. It's supposed to be final by April of 2014. Now, I would encourage you to stay on top of this. A couple of things. First, the battle over what EPA is doing is not over yet, because until this rule is proposed and adopted, there will continue to be a federal risk. You also have a risk that your states, on their own initiative, may attempt to embark on a numeric limit. If you see this happening, contact us. We have resources. We can help you. It's our job. We're also worried about EPA's plans to promulgate a rule for runoff from completed projects. I won't go into great detail, but it's important for us to stay on top of this because it risks giving contractors a long-term liability for the performance of projects they've completed in the past. So we continue to stay on top of that, and we're doing our very best with it. Lead paint. Currently, there's a rule that applies to pre-1978 housing and child-occupied facilities. It requires training, certification, and record keeping. In 2010, EPA proposed to require dust wipe testing before you completed or as you completed any renovation project. And they promised the Sierra Club, God bless them, they promised the Sierra Club to extend the rule to all public and commercial buildings. Well, in 2011 and 13, AGC was able to, in that 2-year period, and frankly, there are a whole slew of activities that took place. EPA rejected dust wipe testing, so the current requirements did not become more onerous, and it pushed back its proposed schedule for extending the rule to all commercial buildings. The original deadline was July of 2013. That's now been pushed back to 2016. This is an ongoing effort. Again, it's like your safety program. We need to go to work every day ready to work on this. Coal combustion waste, fly ash. This is another EPA initiative. In 2009, EPA announced plans to propose storage and disposal requirements. The question is whether they're going to classify this as a solid waste or a hazardous waste. The problem is it's had many beneficial uses in concrete and other products. They proposed to characterize it as hazardous so they could very tightly regulate the disposal, but they wanted to continue to approve some beneficial uses. And frankly, we got back to them and said, you can't do that. You can't explain to the public that this is a hazardous material and then expect us as contractors to continue to make use of it. It's just not going to work. We're worried about the impact on the cost of materials, and Ken may have something to say about that as we go down the road. We're worried about the risk of liability for past uses of newly hazardous material. Some of us still remember and still see the asbestos litigation that's out there. Hydraulic fracking. This is on EPA's radar screen. Ken talked about some very good news in this area. We want that news to continue to roll. There are environmental issues having to do with drinking water and wastewater. In 2010, a Gallup poll found that drinking water contamination was the leading environmental concern of the American people. EPA also wants to regulate wastewater. In 2014, EPA is expected to complete a research project on this subject. The current thinking among EPA professionals is that it is capable of being clean. Well, at what cost and under what terms and conditions? The details are going to matter here. This is viewed primarily as a fight between environmentalists and the energy industry, but as we've heard from Ken, it has potentially great implications for construction. Moving along, the DBE program for federal aid highway construction. This has been a growing concern. I get together a couple of times every year with some of the in-house lawyers in the AGC family. And it is at that meeting and with this subject that I see some of the longest faces I've ever seen. In September of 2012, US DOT proposed to make a bad problem worse. They proposed to require all DBEs to be included with your bid. All requests for waivers would have to be documented, if not immediately, then within 24 hours. All waivers would be subject to federal review. It's not enough that your state finds you made a good faith effort. Someone in Washington has to agree with them. And if you fail to meet your DBE commitments in your contract, that is a material breach. Liquidated damages and other costs are going to be assessed against you. In December of 2015, AGC of America, 15 of its good chapters and 125 members submitted comments. The rule is unworkable, it's costly, it's a costly search for a problem. We cannot identify what it is they're trying to do here. Affirmative action for veterans and the disabled. This is a very, very difficult subject. I don't know a single person in this organization who doesn't want to help veterans. And I don't know anyone who wouldn't go out of their way to help the disabled. But for good reasons and for good causes, bad things can sometimes make their way into the law books. In 2011, we had a proposal to increase the requirements for federal contractors beyond anything we had imagined in the past, listing all vacancies with state employment agencies, create and maintain a file not on each employee, but on each applicant for employment. You had to provide a written explanation if you denied anyone any opportunity they sought for any reason. You had to conduct annual training again and again, and each year you had to review each and all of your job descriptions. With regard to the disabled, there was a 7% goal for each job category, including a 2% sub-goal for the severely disabled. In 2011 and 2012, AGC and over 125 of its members submitted comments on this rule. It is simply too costly. Our estimate is 20 to 30 times what the agency gave us. And it is impractical to apply to the construction industry. More recently, we went to the agency and we said, again, as we do in many cases, what is the problem here? I don't know any contractor that won't go out of its way to hire a veteran. We asked them to provide their enforcement data. We looked at it. It revealed that over an 8-year period, only 5% of all complaint investigations and considerably less than 1% of all compliance reviews had revealed any discrimination against either veterans or individuals with disabilities. So again, what is it we're trying to solve here? Moving along, written safety programs. This has been in the administration's list of things to do from the very beginning. We're concerned that they're still planning a broad rule requiring written injury and illness prevention programs that address all hazards on the project, which means if there's a problem and a hazard surfaces and your plan doesn't cover it because you didn't anticipate it, you have now violated this new standard. It's a double dip on all violations of the General Duty Clause, which already requires all employers to address all recognized hazards, and yet it remains a top priority for this administration. Finally, silica in 2009, OSHA went to the Advisory Committee on Construction Safety and Health to revise a proposal that first came out in 2003. They're now seeking final approval from the Office of Management and Budget to propose a lower limit on exposure, a lower PEL, permissible exposure limit. We're still waiting, but expecting a 50% cut to be the number they propose, and an even lower action level. What this means are engineering controls, respirators, regulated areas, and training, health screening, and monitoring for exposure. So looking at all of this, we've done these 4 areas: labor management relations, environmental, socioeconomic, and safety. This is just a snapshot. This picture changes, if not daily, then certainly monthly. New things are coming up, other things are fading into the background. Our goal is to keep you on the hard sand. You know, these regulatory initiatives are like walking across a beach. When you're close to the water and the sand is hard, you can make some progress. But we have an administration that keeps wanting to push you back into that deep, soft stuff that's going to slow you down. Whether or not you ever face an enforcement action, it becomes a grinding cost of business, and we're doing our best to keep it to a minimum. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. You did great.
Thanks.
Jeff Schoaf, let me say some nice things. Go ahead, you can stand up. Let everybody see you.
I thought it might be a lengthy list, so I was going to sit down.
It should be. So Jeff Schoaf runs our Congressional Affairs Department. He's been with us for about 19 years. Came off the Hill, worked for Bud Schuster Sr., chairman of the Public Works Committee. Jeff, in his capacity, always amazes me about the depth that he jumps into all the issues, legislative issues that impact us. He is a one-man subject matter expert on all the legislative issues that we face. So with that, Jeff, go ahead.
I am not going to go deep into subject matter today, though, because I know I have to many people's pain. I'm the third person up. Ken was rather upbeat. Mike scared the crap out of me. I'm going to try and bring it up a little bit more because I don't think Congress is as bad as the rap that they get. I'm going to talk briefly about it. The best part of mine is that it's the shortest of the three presentations. The way the Congress is working right now, the Democrats want to gain the House, the Republicans want to gain the Senate, and they're using everything they can to set themselves up for that election. The president also is really pushing to have an easier time of things after 2014 than he's had the last 2 years. If you look at just how people are voting right now, the majorities are fractured and the minorities are united. And by that I mean the parties that are in a minority position in the Senate and in the House, the Republicans in the Senate, the Democrats in the House, they're pretty solid. They stick together on just about everything. They understand that they get leverage by working together. The majorities, however, have a very tough time getting all their different wings going in the right direction. So that's kind of what they're up against. Looking at our agenda, we want to create a positive environment for public and private construction. By that we mean stable and reasonable regulations, stable and reasonable tax policy, stable and reasonable funding decisions. Stable and reasonable doesn't always win out in Washington, but it is always our goal. Looking at the fiscal issues, the sequester went into place. $1.2 trillion worth of cuts. Everybody was talking about that last week. It hasn't been talked about nearly as much this week. There's a continuing resolution in the works that the House passed on Wednesday. The Senate will take up next week. It'll give some flexibility to how the administration can carry out the sequester that everybody was worried about. So that's the good news there. The Republicans and Democrats both decided after the scare tactics of last week that we really need to come up with a better plan, and they're working on doing that. The debt ceiling is really the next big fight after they finish the continuing resolution. That's where I think that's the leverage point I think they're going to have for getting something on comprehensive tax reform and some sort of grand bargain. Those two things clearly have to be married up if these guys are ever going to get together on anything. One thing that we've spent an awful lot of time on recently, and we had a great member from Indiana testify this week on multi-employer pension plan reform. This is something that is an issue where we're working closely with organized labor. We're united in the fact that tools need to be added to the toolbox so that long-term problems with multi-employer plans can be fixed, and everybody's on the same page going forward. The hearing on Tuesday was an effort for us to help get Congress informed about the depth of the problem. The good thing is when our witness made his comments, he stopped by to visit with some members of his delegation the day before, and they were all aware of it, all concerned about it, and all wanted to help. And that was a bipartisan feeling. Another area where bipartisan work is going on, immigration reform. Liberals and conservatives are going to take a hard line on employer violations. That was something that really hurt us when they tried this in 2006. They're really looking for draconian kinds of penalties. Talked about debarment for paperwork violations, those sorts of things. We feel like we've educated people on that and got them to take a step back. There's definitely an opposition, opposing positions on what to do with current illegals. And you may think that's illegal rather than illegals, but I'm talking about somewhere between one illegal and the 15 million that people talk about. Democrats want them all to be legal. Republicans aren't really sure what to do with them. Deportation is one answer, but they haven't really decided what to do. As a party, like I said before, in the House, they're very disjointed, and this is an issue where that really comes to fruition. The other place that we're really having trouble is future flow. The last time they did comprehensive immigration reform was 1986. So in the last 27 years, they've had a lot of changes in our economy, in the demands on labor, but we haven't really updated our labor laws. What we're trying to convince people is you need to have future flow. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be something that's controlled by the economic situation, not by some artificial rules put together by Congress. We're fighting right now with organized labor. They want to form a commission, and a commission is going to look at data that I think Ken would verify doesn't really exist. They're going to look at data. They're going to identify who can bring in new labor for what industries and what geographic areas. The business community right now is united against that, and we're trying to hold everything together on that. They're also looking for premium pay on foreign workers. So if you're paying somebody, you're bringing them in under a new visa program, you're going to have to pay them more than you were paying your other workers in order to show that you're not just trying to take advantage of these workers you're bringing in. Our overall goal is to get some certainty on compliance, get legal immigration flexible enough to adjust to market conditions and economic needs, and that's really where we're drawing the line. Healthcare, we had a conversation yesterday yesterday afternoon on healthcare. We learned that 50 individuals isn't the real number. It's 50 full-time equivalents. It doesn't matter how many people you have working for you. It matters how much they're working. Large employers must offer coverage to full-time equivalents and their dependents, or you may be subject to penalties if one of your employees goes and gets a credit in the market. And it starts earlier than January 1, 14. The open enrollment for exchanges actually starts October 1st. Then all the big things roll in on the 1st of January and 14. So we're working on big issues. We're trying to take a good position, make it rational, make it reasonable. We've had success. We had a lot of bipartisan success, repealing 1099, 3% withholding, getting authorizations passed in the last Congress. All of those passed with bipartisan majorities. But we're fighting a situation where political tension exists in an extreme fashion. Both parties are focused on 2014, and these factious majorities are really the ones that are having trouble controlling their own agenda and their own message. With that, I'll turn it over to Steve to help us keep going.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So we have three smart guys up here, eager for your questions. Obviously, I'm here because of my good looks. So hopefully you all have questions, comments that you'd like to ask them. And while you're thinking about that, let me start with one. I'll ask Jeff on immigration reform. In 2007, we kind of saw a lot of the same elements that we're seeing now. Senate, bipartisan group in the Senate comes together. They come up with principles for immigration reform. You have the administration that is supportive of, like the Bush administration. Today we have an administration supportive of immigration reform. But when we got into the details, things collapsed. We work on offense and defense here. Offense, we want a future flow of workers. We want summer and legal status for people that are working in our industry. But on defense, we don't want to see debarment. We don't want to see vicarious liability. We don't want to see increased fines of employers and getting rid of the knowing standard. With all that said, handicap where you think this is going. What are the odds that a bill gets to the president's desk by the end of this Congress?
Well, I guess I'd first like to say that I'm handicapping a game that hasn't really started. They've agreed in principle to go towards this common goal of some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. Once they get past the thin veneer of comprehensive immigration reform, none of those items that you talked about is settled. There is still a lot of debate that has to go on. I'd say it's 50-50 at this point at best that comprehensive immigration reform passes, even though they're talking about it as though it's something that everybody realizes they have to do. The one thing that's changed for me, the thing that bothers me the most is there's a lot of people who feel like it's okay to fail. Failure is an option, and we can try. If we can't get together, we don't really have to compromise. And I'm hoping that some of that feeling goes away. And if that goes away, then we'll be in a much better position to get hard decisions made and get comprehensive immigration reform passed. Dave Conway made a good comment in his when he started the video. We're talking about risk. This is political risk, and politicians are adverse to putting anything out there that's risky at all. This is a very risky issue for both parties, and we're hoping that they're bold enough to manage to not only risk but also manage that risk.
Anybody have a question? Yes, over here. Terry.
Seems that we have people at extremes from the standpoint of their political views at this point, and very few people anywhere near the middle or moderate side. In fact, a lot of the folks who I think all of us would have viewed as moderates over the last year or so, many of them seem to be headed for the exit doors, probably because they can't feel like they're being effective. Is there any reason for us to hope that that situation's going to start to change over time? Because it just seems awfully frustrating for all of us back at the local level to look at what's happening in Washington and see these extreme positions being taken, very little compromise seeming to come into the conversation very often, and you wonder where that whole congressional situation is going to be headed over the long haul.
So Jeff, I'll let you tackle that, and I might add on.
You might, and I'll respect your point of view, of course. I guess what I'd like to say is the loudest people are the most extreme people. The people that are in the middle, that are actually trying to work on getting things done, are the people that know you get that done behind the scenes. You don't get it by going out and blabbing to your favorite talk news station. That doesn't do anything to bring people together. That only makes people drift apart. And it is really easy to get on the unlimited appetite of talk radio and talk television. They've got many opportunities for members of Congress to express extreme views, and they do it. I'd say there's a bigger, quieter, a more thoughtful, more responsible group in the middle than you know of.
I would agree with that. I also think that we have an environment where we have less and less of the seats in the middle, in the House in particular, that are up for grabs in any given election. That through decades of redistricting, lines have been drawn to polarize congressional districts where you have very few that somebody in the middle has a chance of winning and maintaining. And so consequently, if 60% of your electorate in your district is of your party, that doesn't require you to find common ground. All you want to do is stake out a position that's similar to the 60% of the electorate that's in your district that's going to reelect you every 2 years. And then those people who get closer to the middle and seem to want to work in a bipartisan fashion have to look over their shoulder all the time about getting primaried from somebody who's more extreme, either liberal or conservative than they are. Jeff, why don't you add a little bit about what the Club for Growth is doing right now in about 9 or 10 districts, trying to encourage people to run against Republicans that they consider to be too moderate or liberal, trying to energize somebody to primary them.
Well, the Club for Growth about a week ago came out with a program called PrimaryMyCongressman.com. They picked 9 members of the House that they said were not true Republicans and wanted to get them primaried. Well, I decided to look into some of the votes that they decided were bad votes. One was the extension of 95% of the Bush tax cuts on January 1st. Another one was the passage of the highway authorization. Those were the kind of bills that they were looking at as bad for America and bad for the Club for Growth. So I know that we score those as positive bills, so I went and looked at the vote record for these individuals, and all of them have a 100% voting record with us except one, and that person has a 90% voting record on construction issues. And I thought it kind of showed to me the extreme depths that some of the groups are going to draw the wedge that Terry talked about that makes everybody look like they can't get along. And that's something that I think is not helpful to actually getting the big issues that we need to tackle done in America.
Anyone else? Somebody's got to have a question. Paul Diedrich, you always have a question. Yeah, Ted, did you have a question back there? With your booming voice, you don't need a microphone.
Well, as we talk about all the stuff going on in Washington, D.C., and the two parties are so at each other, and then our senator out of Oregon comes out with a perfect solution, and that's a national legislation that allows us to smoke dope anywhere in the country. And obviously that's, after toking a little bit in the back room there, wouldn't that solve everything? I mean, Blumenauer did a great job for us, didn't he?
I guess the question is, why does Paul want to leave the room right after you said that? I mean, that could take the edge off it. I think the other the other thing that you need to think about is kind of the job that we have to do to keep pushing these people back together. The things that we've been able to achieve on the regulatory side that Mike talked about are done through education. They're done through our own research that counteracts some of the crazy ideas that are coming out of the agencies. And that's what we've got to keep doing to the members of Congress. We've got big issues. There are solutions that are attainable, and we need to keep pushing them towards doing that.
Yeah, and I might just jump in on that, because on the regulatory side, one of the things that we've found is that sometimes our best friends are the career people in the bureaucracy. They certainly have their views, but they tend to be less extreme than the political appointees. We had a great deal of success in dealing with the new federal stormwater permit. We submitted written comments on that permit, and afterwards, the agency actually invited us to come in and sit down with the fellow who was writing the permit. AGC's, thanks to our environmental forum, has been able to establish a lot of credibility with those regulators, and we actually had a 3-hour meeting with the permit writer and his superior and her superior. And they had lots of questions about our comments, and there was follow-up with our environmental forum where we put more information before them, candidly, honestly. And at the end of the day, we were very successful in curbing the excesses of that. So fortunately, I don't get up to the Hill very often, but there are times and occasions where, you know, if you establish your credibility and you maintain it, you can actually accomplish a few things.
And I think Mike is being a little modest there. He and Leah Wood, Leah Polkonis, have done a great job of maintaining a relationship with an agency, EPA, that is for the most part hostile to our views, but has been able to go in, lay out the facts, explain in a rational fashion how their proposals will impact our industry. And based upon those relationships and that credibility, we've been able to mitigate a lot of stuff. And as he said, he could have gone a lot longer, but he would have demonstrated in going a lot longer how we actually have made a difference. So.
Well, and if I can go off script, Connie Dieterman is in the room. Connie's the chair of the steering committee of our environmental forum. I just want to thank you personally for doing such a good job with that. You've given us a lot of leadership.
Yeah, the depth that we have in that area really does give us credibility on the Hill. It really, going back to when we were going through Safety Lou and through T21, we had an interaction with Hillary Clinton's office, which we weren't all that friendly with going in. They decided that they could listen to us and listen to the environmental community, but they wouldn't have the environmental community in the room with us because the environmental community wouldn't listen. So they decided to talk to us. They kind of took what we did, they made it their own. Then they went back to the environmental community and said, this is what we want to do. They understood we were looking from research, we were looking from facts, and it really did kind of change the way things went in that particular office. And it really surprised me how effective we were able to be in what I thought would have been a much more hostile situation if we hadn't been prepared.
Yes, Dirk.
Do we have legislation written on multi-employer pension reform? And if we do, are we getting traction with potential sponsors and things like that?
We do not yet have legislation drafted. We're in the process of drafting it with the same coalition that came up with the principles. The whole idea is to move that out slowly as we're getting support for the idea that we're not looking for a bailout. We're just looking for more tools that'll help us address the long-term needs of the program as it goes along. There is a good report, and it was referenced in the slide. But I can get you that report, and that's what we're starting to work from. It lays out the problem and lays out the solution, and the bill is coming later.
And I just want to add an editorial comment about our involvement in the multi-employer pension reform issue. Well, there may be a lot of non-union contractors within AGC who scratch their head and wonder why AGC is committing staff resources and time and member resources to this issue. It really doesn't impact me. I'm an open shop guy. 70% of AGC's open shop. Keep in mind, if these multi-employer plans and they're dumped on the PBGC, that's where the real bailout will occur. And not only will it be the federal government bailing out these plans and providing benefits to the beneficiaries, but it also is going to likely result in higher premiums for all the other employers out there who offer retirement benefit programs. So while this appears to be something that only impacts union contractors, union employers, it does have a secondary impact on employers generally.
Yeah, it could also be a headline grabber that discourages people from coming into the industry if they think it's unstable, if they think it's fiscally unstable, if they think it's as bad as the federal government. Who wants to join it, right?
So, I think I saw another question over here somewhere. Yes, Harry.
What is going to happen with the oil pipeline? I saw a report, I think, from the State Department. It was kind of semi-favorable, but still nothing's happening.
The State Department did come out with a favorable ruling. I don't know if you paid attention to John Kerry's one-day trip from being senator to Secretary of State, but it is a Secretary of State that does the analysis of the new pipeline path. It wasn't until late January that Nebraska finished their review and came up with a new plan. With the Secretary of State now saying that they couldn't find any problems with it. It's up to the president to now sign off on it. The environmental community is putting a big push on it, and right now Republicans and common sense Democrats are putting a big push on making sure that the thing gets done. There is a bipartisan group that wants to get it done, starting with the states in the northern tier. I think in the North Dakota Senate race, the Democrat running for the Senate in North Dakota came out for the XL pipeline before the Republican. I mean, that's how that works in real America. So I'm hopeful that it gets done. I did talk to the senator who is heading up the push to get the pipeline built last week, and he felt confident that we had nothing else in our way, and it was just pushing the president to make the right choice at this point.
Okay. Yes.
I just have a question or comment regarding 2014, because 2014 is obviously going to be very critical, to us as a nation. And it sounds like a lot of the focus should be on state and local activity to strengthen that, but also on the Congress and Senate to retain control of that, because that would be a disaster. Because the more I think all of us see with the president and the administration, he just seems to get stronger every day and gets more arrogant. And so what are you finding as far as dealing with the White House? Is there any softening, or is it, are we just better off to focus on making sure we don't lose the House in 2014?
Well, I think the White House I didn't see any softening last week, but this week he's having a lot of meals with Republicans, so that is some softening. I do think that there is a realization on their part that they overplayed sequester. They overplayed the drama card instead of coming up with some sound solution to the sequester. So I think they've dialed that back. They've got big budget issues. They did pass a no budget, no pay bill in the House and Senate, which really holds up the paychecks for senators and House members if they don't pass a budget. Passing a budget, yes, sets parameters, but it also forces everybody to take votes on tough issues. So I think that's something that they're hoping they can get through in a way that doesn't alienate too many folks. I think looking at the agencies that really administer the White House's work, I think the work that Mike's done on the regulatory side really has had an impact on, like he said, on the bureaucrats. They've been pushing back against some of the politicals for a long time, and in some cases they actually win. In some cases, reason comes through, and that's something to be hopeful for. I haven't been back to check and see whether the meals with the president actually worked, but the fact that he's reaching out to Paul Ryan, who was pretty high profile on the other side in the last election, to me was a good sign, and the fact that he's budget committee chairman, again, makes it look like he wants to take responsibility for some of the bad things rather than just blaming the other side.
Well, and I think the president, his folks have recognized they have overplayed their hand. The Gallup daily tracking of the president's approval rating is down in 47%. I think the public isn't stupid. They recognize that there is enough, notwithstanding the sequester, there is enough money in the federal treasury to pay for White House tours, and the president just looks mean and petty when they cancel that. And I think they recognize that he's got to improve his brand a little bit. So,
and it's a big risk.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be confused with anybody who's optimistic, but
won't happen, Mike. Won't happen.
But having said that, the latest nomination to head EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, Gina McCarthy, was probably the least bad option that we saw out there. So we're cautiously optimistic that we can establish a relationship with her. And of course, we're waiting to see who's going to be the new Secretary of Labor. That's going to be a big signal as to where things are going.
So I think that's about all the time we have, but I would be remiss if I didn't want to make one point to piggyback on the last question. And that is, everybody here has it within their power to help us in these efforts. We have our Legislative Action Center on our website that within 45 seconds, you can contact your member of Congress with an email on any issue that we have on the Legislative Action Center, the major issues that impact AGC and the construction industry. You can do that very quickly and for free. And for those of you who've already done it, I think you recognize how quick and efficient it is. The second thing is perhaps a little more difficult, but nonetheless just as important, and that's to support the AGC PAC. The 2014 elections are critical. It's obvious that the president and his folks, their strategy is to do everything they can to win back the House. And if they do that, they have 2 years of clear sailing to really push their agenda through and do a lot more things, not only in the regulatory field, but in the legislative field that will be harmful to your business. And if you haven't made a contribution to the PAC, it'd be a great time to make that investment so that we're able to continue to support pro-business and pro-construction candidates. So with that, thank you very much for being here and for your continued support. Thanks.
Nice job, guys.
Yeah, very nice. You did so much.